The other day, I found myself walking through a parking garage stairwell in Iowa City, and I realized that they were using the same scent design as the local mall in Bratislava where we used to live. Half shocked, half amused, I climbed the cement stairs as I remembered riding the escalator through the same subtle scent cloud 2 years ago. The memory was visceral. Though we don't always think about it, our sensory experiences have a strong impact on how we feel and how we work. I do my best work in a situation where I feel comfortable. In fact, I generally prefer not to work at home because step one for me to working at home is often to clean the entire house, put music on, light a candle, pick flowers, make tea, etc. And so I spend an hour prepping to work before I do anything. I bet you've already put considerable time and effort into making your classroom a space where you feel comfortable and where students feel welcome. Today is not about changing any of that. It's just about finding small places where you might be able to tune your sensory dashboard in class to make it work even better for you and your kiddos. By thinking specifically about the senses, just like we have students do in their writing, you can find easy wins to make the workspace more welcoming, more energizing, and maybe even a little more comfortable for everyone inside. One more thing before we dive in. Perhaps you've heard me mention already in this series, but I've created a really extensive toolkit for you to help you as you fine-tune your classroom space, as you make little adjustments, try different things. It's called the Evolving Ed Design Toolkit, and it's a great resource. It's a free resource. I'm going to put the link in the show notes for you to grab it if you want it. Okay, let's go. Welcome to the Spark Creativity Teacher Podcast, a podcast for English teachers looking for more. More creativity, more engagement, more joy, and no more scripted curriculum, lesson planning ruts, or boring book lists. I'm Betsy Potash, and I'm honored you're trusting me to help. You're not alone on this creative journey anymore. Okay, so let's start by thinking about your classroom's sensory dashboard. If you think in terms of the categories of sight, touch, smell, taste, and sound, what would your dial be like for each? In my experience, we all tend to focus on sight, and that's definitely a big one, a doozy, if you will. Considering your light sources, keeping your colors in tune with each other, incorporating nature anywhere and everywhere that you can, and showcasing diverse identities in your posters, your displays, your bookshelves are all ways you can help sight work for you in your classroom. But sight is really just the glitter on the disco ball. It's not the end. There's more to be found on the classroom sensory dashboard. So let's consider touch next. While the research on fidgets is mixed, providing some quiet options to students who really benefit from them can help curtail other distractions. I'm going to put a link in the show notes to read a little bit more about this over on Edutopia. Another way to think about touch is to incorporate scaffolds hanging on clotheslines or in little boxes on shelves or through resource decks or books that students know are available. So they have things that they can go to. For example, one of my favorite easy scaffolds is to have a deck of cards that explain the different literary terms. And then if a student's doing a poetry activity or an annotation walk or writing a literary analysis essay, whatever, and they can't remember, wait, what's the difference between a metaphor and a simile? Or, oh, what's that word for a sound that's written out like it's a word? They can just go over and look at the deck. Maybe you have those cards sort of strung in a line across your wall and students can just go grab a couple that they are working with that day. Or maybe you have them in a little box on a shelf and they just always know that that resource is available, like a dictionary. You can also provide makerspace elements to students. We've talked about this quite a bit in here. Angela Stockman's awesome work on the writing makerspace is always on the back of my mind. If you have students who like to make their ideas physical before they start to write about them, this can be a really great way to consider touch in your classroom. So that might look like having a bunch of Post-its or having big pieces of butcher paper. It could look like popsicle sticks where students can write ideas and move them around to create like a wall of argument. It might look like Play-Doh. There's all kinds of possibilities for the makerspace. It doesn't have to be expensive stuff. It just gives students a chance to put their ideas out into the physical world before they start writing words. Another great option with touch is hexagonal thinking. This is something we can do to help students make unique connections across the disciplines, connections to things happening in life, connections between characters and themes and big ideas and style. Again, we've talked about hexagonal thinking a lot in other episodes, so we're not going to go way into it, but that's another form of touch. Having discussions that are based around physical manipulatives, we're definitely going to put that on our sensory dashboard. Let's see. Furniture. If it's at all possible for you to have any flexible seating or furniture that can be made mobile with wheels or just by dragging it around, or like little carpet squares that students can move around, that's another way to incorporate variability in your touch dial on your dashboard, right? That's really great. If students can have the choice between a beanbag and a stool and their regular chair and a rug, that's just going to only help them when they're figuring out how they work best. Okay, also in the touch realm, there's gamification, like if you can incorporate like a board game or something with dice or something with Jenga or whatever, like that can be a fun way to bring in touch to your classroom design. Escape rooms are another great way to get students moving around the physical space and thinking about, is there a clue under here? Is there, something I need to learn from this pile of photographs over here? That's wonderful too. But that's a little more about a lesson strategy now than the space. So let's move on to the next element on the dashboard. And this one's kind of easy to miss. It's subtle, and that's smell. But smell is actually so defining for us, right? A smell can really quickly bring up a powerful memory, as in the intro to this podcast today. So these are just small things you can do in your classroom. Maybe you can have the windows open sometimes. Maybe during a prep period, you're allowed to burn a scented candle or one of those little sort of oil warmer things that I've never totally understood, but that make like a nice smell in your classroom. Maybe you can bring in some flowers from your yard, just like little things that are going to feel nice to you and probably to your students too. And maybe if you start them, then maybe they'll become involved with that too. All right, next up, taste. Well, accessing the taste sense in class usually is going to require some donations or some budget from the school, or you to do some baking the night before. It can be a really powerful lever in your classroom design. If you can have an emergency snack drawer for kids who really need a snack, if you can have candy prizes that you can draw on sometimes for games or to like liven up a discussion sometime when it's kind of lagging, if you can have a tea drawer that you can bust out for book tastings or poetry readings or whatever, these can all be helpful small touches in the design of your learning environment. Finally, let's talk about sound. This is really a pretty easy part of the dashboard to take advantage of once you start to tune into it. You can curate playlists for different types of classroom scenarios, although please be careful to avoid distracting lyrics. You don't want your sound dial to go too high, right? You don't want to play something that's going to have all your students dancing and singing along and totally losing track of whatever they're doing. Nature sounds, classical music with like a fun feel to it, but that doesn't have words. These things can help students either to relax or to get energized for project work without getting heavily distracted. Maybe you want to play the sound of a river or the sound of a snowstorm as students work. On the other end of the spectrum, think about how you can dial down sound. Some students may really struggle to focus when there's a small buzz of conversation in the room, the way there might be during an editing workshop. And you could also consider building an area into your room where kids can get away from sound. Maybe there's sound canceling headphones over on a side desk where students can go if they just want to focus and they want to ignore the world of the classroom for a little while. Or maybe they can put those headphones in and turn it to classical piano just to block out the conversations around them. I know for me, that could be really helpful. I am often in a situation that's kind of noisy and I just put in my headphones and I blast George Winston's album Autumn on piano. And my mind is tapped into the fact that that's the soundtrack of me doing totally focused work in a really overwhelming space. And speaking of overwhelm, the key, I think, as you consider this sensory dashboard is to create an inviting, flexible space where students feel comfortable and that you keep in mind this idea of overwhelm. Sometimes creating a flexible, inviting space means dialing down a sensory element on your dashboard so that kids don't tune into it too much. Sometimes it means dialing up an element to add some helpful or playful element to your lesson for that day. But just kind of guidelines to keep in mind, like having a limited color palette instead of just hundreds of different shades of color, having music without lyrics, putting some succulents in your windowsills, but not necessarily hanging jungle-like all throughout the room, having a tea drawer, but maybe not a full buffet. These are things that can just add to your classroom without becoming really, really distracting. And that is great. All right, moving past this idea of the dashboard, another thing I wanted to incorporate today is a concept that comes from a book I've been reading called Make Space. So this is a really cool book. I love it as just a coffee table book. These two guys from the Stanford Design School, Scott Dorley and Scott Withoft, write all about how they've designed the space of the Stanford D School over the years and how they've worked on design projects with all these different businesses and event planners and architects or interior designers, graphic designers. I don't even know the nature of all the professions that are featured in the book, but it's really fun to look at all these different workspaces and work elements. And one of the things they talk about is creating special touches to create a sense of belonging. And this concept comes into classrooms in so many different ways. I love seeing how teachers use these special touches, and it's different for everybody, but I'm hoping that if this is something you haven't really felt free to do in your classroom, that maybe hearing about this from these Stanford D School guys who specifically say, quote, special touches create a sense of belonging might make you feel like you can. I've seen such cool things in my explorations online of different learning and workspaces. And it's not always what you expect, right? Maybe a really famous company has their workers working in these little pod rooms, or maybe they have ping pong in the middle of the office or whatever it is. What would be fun for you? What would make your students feel like, wow, that's cool. That's so special. I'm really going to remember that in 5 years or 10 years or whatever. Maybe you love basketball and you put a basketball hoop up in your classroom. And sometimes when students want to start a piece of writing over, they're allowed to throw their old draft through the basketball hoop. Or maybe you design some kind of game where, they throw answers through the hoop, and once they go through, they get a point, or I don't know, whatever. Maybe you love candy and you put a gumball machine in your room. Maybe like me, you absolutely love reading in a swing and you find a way to attach a swing to your ceiling that students can read in. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. The idea is that there's something that makes it different than just the straight classroom, right? Something that's part of your personality that maybe is part of your students' community. They can help you come up with these special touches to create a sense of belonging too. Who knows what it might be? It depends on your students. Which brings me to the next part of the pod here, which is think about all different ways that students can be part of sensory design for your classroom. Let them share their ideas. You can give them a survey. I've designed a survey that you can give them that's in your toolkit that you can grab in the show notes today, the free download. And it just asks them things like, where do you like to do your work? If you could choose to do your homework anywhere, where would you? Why is that space so great for you to be productive? If you were going to listen to music while working, what kind of playlist would you choose? What kind of seating do you like when you're working? What's something you would change about our classroom? If you could press a button and make our classroom have a smell, what would it be? Just like little questions that can give you feedback on what your student community would really benefit from. What helps them focus? What makes them feel energized? What's their favorite snack? It's good to know these things. Okay, last but not least, I wanted to leave you with like the quickest idea. If you just have time to literally spend 1 minute on your sensory classroom design this week, consider how you might just press play on something on your projector. And again, there's a bunch of links for this in your toolkit. But for example, there's a video on YouTube where you just hit play and it shows you like this beautiful crackling fire in a cozy study on a gray, rainy day in Scotland with a castle across the grass out the window. And you could just play that while students were reading. And it would just be fun, right? It would add like a little touch. It's not too distracting. It's literally just flames crackling. It's not like there's dialogue or anything going on. It's just an ambient video. You could play NASA footage. I'm putting this in the blog post associated with this podcast. I'm embedding all these videos, but they're also linked in the toolkit. But this NASA footage is so fun. It's 8 hours of different stunning space photos with like really peaceful, relaxing music. So you could have a little tradition for a few days where during a 10-minute writing series, you're playing this beautiful video of space. And it might just add an element, right? Bring in that sense of peace that can come with staring up at the sky at night. Stanford D School has this really amazing series of timers. This is going to be the last one I shout out in the podcast today, although there are so many different little videos that you could make part of your classroom space. The Stanford D School timers run from 1 minute to 5 minutes, I think, and there are like 4 or 5 different ones for each time frame. And they're so creative. So like as the timer counts down, there are these little animations that are happening on the screen. And it's just fun. And if you want to say, turn to a partner and, write down 3 questions for a discussion, you have 2 minutes. If you press play on this little timer, it's just going to create this fun little visual element. So students know you're serious, that they only have 2 minutes and they really need to get to work. But it also just might make them smile as they're working, right? To see like a little funny animation of creative flames being fanned or little balls bouncing back and forth across the screen. Okay, my friend, that is all for today. Today, we focused on sensory design. Last week, we talked about student agency. In the first episode of this series, we talked about designing flexible classroom spaces and displays. We will continue with at least one more episode in this classroom design series. So stay tuned for that, and be sure you grab that free toolkit. It's really cool. If you don't have it yet, I really want you to have it. I spent so long on it for you. Okay, until next time, take care of yourself and stay creative.